first several minutes of the first episode of the World's Toughest Mudder 2023 podcast, I spoke about my feelings about the complaints, and you can go back and listen to that now or later. But there's another piece I wanted to add that I thought of as we were getting ready for this call. It's two things, actually. It might be three by the time I'm done. And it's going through my photos, and I should have brought it up because it's going to take me forever to find, but there's a photo I was taking, a bunch of photos at the start line. Love going back and looking at those later. Oh my gosh, there's Austin before he started. There's Callie looking nervous, whatever it is. And there's a photo I took of 7 people, really fit. And this isn't to call them out. This is just sort of talking about the event. And it's Hannah, and it's Ian Caskey, and it's maybe Trevor, and it's CBJ, and this great picture. And I posted, actually, it's probably on my feed. Actually, I could probably easily find it. I said, who's going to be in the podium? And all of those people had podium dreams, and I don't think any of them ended up on the podium. Tyler Veerman, because that's what this event does. Within 8 hours, you come back, you're like, oh, there's Chris in a hoodie. There's Tyler. Like, what happened? Maybe they quit. Maybe they got hurt. Whatever it is, right? The excuses or the reasons don't really matter. So I want to say that we all come in, with these massive dreams, and many of us have built our year on it. And if I had said to this is the last thing I'll say, and then we're going to let you let it rip. Any of the 700 to 800 people in that pit, listen, just want to give you a bit of a heads up this year, harder than previous years. Really long penalties, really hard obstacles. Are you ready for today? You want to go do this? Hell yeah. That's what I came here for. Am I right or am I right? Wait a minute. Chris made really long penalties. I want my money back. I don't want to do this, the world's toughest mudder anymore. So all of you wanted the race to test you and push you. And then when it pushed you in a way you didn't like, you found a reason to complain. That's my 2 cents. Chris Maltbie, what are your first thoughts upon hearing my rant and all of that I just said to you?
Well, I listened to your first episode, and I have to say, Matt, I wouldn't say we usually disagree, but I will say, particularly in this instance, I agreed with everything you said, right? To me, Worlds is such a powerful platform because it's really hard. It's right there in the name. It is World's Toughest Mudder. Secondly, because no 2 years are the same. Correct. And partially that's things that we do, me and my team do, with obstacles and penalties and all of that. We've been at a bunch of different venues, and there's things outside of our control. Who knows when it's going to plummet? It was 25 degrees in the week leading into Worlds this year, and then the temperatures skyrocketed for the weekend. It was much easier. It was the opposite last year. There was windstorms in Lake Las Vegas in 2014. There's all of these things that happen that make it such a dynamic race. And I think when we look back over years and years and years, and you listen to the stories the community tells, all of the stories really revolve around what crazy thing happened or what the hardest part of the experience was, or, whatever it might be. And I think that just speaks to what people connect to with the race. So I totally understand. It's really hard when you set a goal and you don't hit it. At the same time, that's, at least in my experience, that's where the opportunity for growth comes from. When I was racing Worlds every year, I had one real goal and a secondary goal. My first goal was to come in top 5 for a long time. I came in 6th place 2 years in a row. And both of those years, it was absolutely devastating to me. But on that, my last year, I came in 4th, and it was worth all of the years previously because I had trained way harder to hit that goal. I dug way deeper, and ultimately it meant way more to me that year to achieve the goal than it would have if I did the first year. I don't know if I would have run Worlds as many times.
And for people who aren't familiar, you did work for Tough Mudder in a different capacity. You weren't the race director.
Correct.
So explain to people when they talk about, some people might not know you ran. And at one point you actually didn't work for Tough Mudder for a couple of years, but either way, you've run it a bunch of times, 75 miles a bunch of times, blah, blah, blah. And now you're the director, race director.
And now I'm here. Right. But yes, that's correct. And that's one of the reasons that Worlds is so important to me, to be honest. I know how transformational it can be. The fact that I'm I run ultra marathons and I do all that sort of stuff now is directly linked back to the hook that was sank when I first ran Worlds in 2013. So it can be transformative for that reason. And then I think about something like setting mileage goals, right? I always wanted an orange jacket and never got one. I ran 95 miles in 2017. And then my last year, which was my best year, I ran 90 miles because the course was that hard. The penalties were that hard. And in retrospect, I don't look at back at that as failing a goal, right? Like I ran the best race of my life to get to that 90 miles, and it'll be, it's more special to me than an orange jacket ever could be. So it's really hard in the year. We all set mileage goals. We want the fancy bib. We want the belt buckle. We want whatever we want. And if we don't get it, it's really, really hard. But I think there's opportunity within that. And that's why this year we came in and we wanted to make it, harder than it's been. And you and I talked beforehand. I told you it was going to be harder. The race briefing, I said the penalties were harder. We go over all of the obstacles in advance now. It's something we haven't always done, where we go a week in advance, you get the obstacle list. I don't know if you remember, but it used to be a surprise on the day of the race, what all the obstacles would be for several of those years. We didn't used to have obstacle bypass wristband. So the race is adapted in a lot of really good ways. I think I want people to know what they're going to face a couple days in advance to prepare. You'll remember at the race briefing this year, I was really encouraging people to go look at videos of how to do the grappler, because if you have the technique coming in and you know how to throw it, it's not that hard. But if you come in and your first attempt is, blind, it could take you 20 attempts before you'll get up, and you only had 3. So, I want people to succeed in that way. I don't want it to be because they're not prepared. But at the same time, the consequences, I think were, miscalibrated the past couple of years. We had really fun, unique penalties, but they were out of sync, I think, with the difficulty of the obstacles, which meant we saw a lot, even our top racers, will take the path of least resistance, right? And as they should, they're trying to hit their goal and, have the best race they can. But it's on us as, the sort of the product designers, the race designers, to make sure that it's worth it to put in the effort to get across dingleberries, or to figure out the technique for the grappler, or to work on your balance for twinkle toes, or whatever it is. Like, we need to make sure the penalty is bad enough that it's worth it to put in the effort. Otherwise, the obstacles become secondary, and they shouldn't be secondary. It's obstacle course racing. That's what makes World's toughest, the race that it is.
So when you and I did speak briefly at the brunch, I did say that I do believe in rewarding obstacle completion. I think it definitely should be commensurate with, I can't think of the right word, but if you're just doing an obstacle race in the world, like out there, right, whether it's a Spartan or a Tough Mudder or a Spartan, Tough Mudder, Spartan, or a Savage, and you fail, you fall in the water and you move on, like life goes on, like the consequence is like, cool, I need to learn to be better at that. An event like this, that is, once again, the world's toughest mudder, money is on the line, age group prizes are on the line. It should be a huge difference between winning and losing, failing and not failing. However, having said that, I do think when we looked at Chunky Monkey last year, we said, okay, that's probably not great if no one can do it. If 1%, whatever I don't know what the magical percent is for you guys to figure out, but I feel like if it's less than 10, less than 5, it's not ideal. So that's where I think you could alter in the middle of the night. Jason Rulo says that he said Nolan and Eli did that all the time. I don't know if they did it all the time. Maybe they did it once or twice, but he said if everyone was failing, they'd make an adjustment. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you, right? If no one can complete it, then adjustments need to be made within reason. And there were small things, right? We did change Spunky Monkey overnight to go in reverse. And that was always in the race plan, because we knew going up monkey bars down a rope would always be easier. And I know full well, right? Obstacles, it's one of the hardest things actually about calibrating obstacles for Worlds, which is what would be a 50% completion, maybe even 70% completion on a normal event weekend when you're running one lap will plummet overnight. So we did have, small things like that baked into the plan to try to help accommodate. And we made changes to the penalties as we went too, right? When we adjusted way too tough, pulled the weights off, the scales off, because it just wasn't going to be able to keep up with the failure rate. And so there are modifications we can make as the race go on, and we try to have some in our back pocket. We had backup plans for a number of areas, and in the week leading in, we do our best to modify as well. Right? Believe it or not, the penalties were a lot longer when I first got there, a lot longer. And when I was doing my initial course tour, I had several of them cut in half, including the grappler.
So the
Which had
grappler was
been,
a mile and a half
it
penalty.
was twice as long. Yeah. So we went in with a certain plan, but there's things you see on the ground and you try to pivot them to make sure, when I saw it, it was excessive. We pulled it back. So I agreed. There's opportunity. It's just cool for the race to adjust things as you go along. But we made a number of adjustments that I felt good about to try to help.
And I gotta say, for the times that I did World's Toughest, I do feel like that was part of the fun. Hey, they switched this up now. I liked it the way they did it before, or actually this part's harder. This one's closed now. Yay. This one's closed now. Shit. I was actually good at this one. Like, to me, that's all part of it. And it's why it's honestly kind of hilarious that we ever try to set mileage goals. And I think we all kind of know that, those of us that have been around, but you truly don't know. It's not like any other event, because that is going to happen. Obstacles don't just come on. They do sometimes come off. Sometimes it's because of safety. Sometimes it's because of y'all's plans. I don't remember. You'll have to, when I was looking at the schedule of opening, particular for me, we're going to film things, right? It's like, okay, well, we can't go film that obstacle if no one's doing it. It felt to me they weren't all on until really late. Is that always what happens, or did you do a much more gradual thing? Like, I think it was 8 or 9 o'clock before they were all on.
It was 10 o'clock. And that was, so I can't quite recall the past couple of years when the last one opened.
Other than like the cliff was a cool thing to just open at midnight. But like,
right.
Besides that, like usually they all open kind of within the first few hours.
Yeah. And so we did, Dingleberries was the last to open this year. That was at 10 p.m. And that was very intentional, right? I knew that was a hard obstacle. I didn't want it out there for 24 hours or close to 24 hours, right? I knew that'd be a real challenge. And so we opened it much later in the race. So people would encounter it fewer times, but also so they would have to complete it less times, right? When they were chasing their goals, and to throw that curveball in there. When we talk about incentivizing obstacle completion, that's a great way, if you've got a race that's neck and neck, to give a leg up to someone who's trained for it, right? And exact completion percentages are hard to dial in on, but I do look at the race, and this is just a really simple qualitative look. It's like Austin won pretty handily. He did 105 miles. I didn't think anyone would hit 100 miles on this course. He hit 105, and he only failed 2 obstacles the entire race, is what he told us. So that kind of tells me most of what I need to know, which is if you have the obstacle proficiency, and now Austin's an absolute beast. So if he's the only one, then
and can we also say sort of an Adonis, if you will? I mean, is it that fair that he's that good looking and that strong? Is it fair
and so nice, right?
And like, and a sweetheart. Is it really fair to us? Go ahead.
No,
sorry,
it's not. But yeah, I mean, that's the direction we want to go, right? Where it's, as you get to, we say the race really starts at midnight. When you're hitting that phase, like 1 or 2 really hard obstacles open up, and it's the people who can rise above and complete them at that point that will get a competitive advantage in the race. And to me, that doesn't feel miles off.
That is said a lot, and I think we should change it. I think it starts at 3 a.m. because that's the hardest fucking part. 2 to 6, course is quiet. It's your brain starts telling you things. I learned by year 6, let's say, that it doesn't matter how cold it is. The course will start thinning out really, really badly. Even my guy, German, my filming guy this year noticed. He goes, in the morning, he was like, why does it look so much more crowded? I'm like, because a lot of those people went to their tents because they just want the pain to stop. even without a 32-degree low. It's just really hard to stay out there all night.
It really is. And I think that compounds actually as people start to turn in. That was always my experience. The emotional low of that race was always 3 a.m. There was no one around. You're so far into the race, you're already exhausted. You know you're going to get to some obstacles where you're previously you would have had help and now you're all alone. And you're just trying to get through. It's when it is the coldest. It's just when the sun comes up, it's a new day, and there actually is a little second wind that I would always get. I think a lot of people do, and people get back out on the course. But that 3 a.m. time is just those are dark days. And so I do think that's a period of the race that makes a huge difference. Yeah, it's crazy. I think the other thing that comes to mind too, and it just goes to show how not only for participants, but also as we design worlds, it's an interesting challenge to calibrate, right? We look at the things that have changed over the years with Men of Matterhorn and the Everest Angels. And there's a gang out there at Dublin Walls. I don't know if they have a name yet.
It's growing now. It's like more and more obstacles. It's cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And that's such a special part of what makes Tough Mudder, right? People that are willing to funnel all of their endurance to helping other people instead of their own goals. I think that's amazing. But it's also an interesting thing that we have to keep in mind when we're dialing in difficulty. Once upon a time, I think you've been there. I know I've been there. You'd get to Everest in the middle of the night, no one was there. It's like you better figure out a way to get up and over it. Or you get to Matterhorn and really have to struggle up it. So it's interesting. Now there's things that aren't gimmies. It's still hard to get pulled over a wall or to get a leg up. But there are areas of the course where there's more built-in assistance because of the community than there would have been previously. And I think that opens us and obstacle bypass wristbands again as an opportunity to opt out of whatever is the hardest or has the hardest penalty. So there's another level of strategy that goes into the race now, which frees us a little bit, I think, to make things a little bit more difficult. Because if we put out one thing that's just too hard, after 25 miles, there's always a wristband to bypass it. And there's areas where you get more support now than you would have.
Which we did not have in my day. I just want to say you just did your penalty.
Yeah.
So I'm fine with it, by the way. I like it. I like it because I think if you're out there that long, you've earned it. It's not too easy. You don't get two every time. There's the strategy towards the end of the night and all that. So I like the one wristband every 5 once you've hit 25. So we've talked about a lot about what I liked. We do need to talk about a couple of things that obviously were not ideal. And that I know you're not happy with, but that I'd like to give you a chance to speak about publicly, and that is obstacles not being ready. So people come to the hot lap on Friday. This is hey, this is a chance for my family to see this and maybe even try the obstacles, et cetera, et cetera. And clearly that sucks, right? So can you explain to us what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, and you're right. No one's more upset about it than I am, although I'm really proud of the team that nothing opened late as a result of it, even when we had to work on things on the day of the event, which is inconceivable to me. Effectively, two things happened in the build week. So we have just over a week to build all of the obstacles for our events. There was really bad weather in Granbury, which if you were just there on the weekend, is hard to imagine, but it was heavy rain. The ground was super soft, so we couldn't get equipment to a lot of places. Granbury is already a tough place to dig water pits because there's so much rock under the surface. And so we were doing more difficult digs with much less time. And then it was very, very cold that week, which just slows everything down as well when the ground is frozen because it's 25 degrees. So we had some challenges in that regard. And then we had a trailer that was damaged on the way that had a lot of vital equipment. So it had a bunch of our walls on it. All of Matterhorn was on it. A bunch of our tents were on it. All of our staging was on it. Things that were meant to build Coach's Corner were on it. So there was a ton of stuff that actually didn't arrive in Granbury until Thursday, which is the day before the hot lap. You can imagine looking at Matterhorn. Matterhorn is a very large build that takes quite a bit of time. So we were really on the back foot with things arriving. In general, that truck that came even when we found out it had been damaged, it was still meant to be there 2 or 3 days earlier than it ended up showing up because of the logistical problems. So we were up against it in that regard. And that just slowed everything down. Having to funnel resources when a trailer comes late puts off other things that should have been done in advance. And so, we did the best we could to get stuff open for the hot lap, whatever we thought could be reasonably opened. But our focus was always on being race ready, at least by the time, obstacles were set to open for the race. So not ideal. It's not a position we've been in before. But I think we mostly succeeded in it not impacting the race, although it's not the look we like for sure.
And let's go back to the penalties, because I'm one that's not for I'm not for what I like to call silly penalties. I don't think that's really what it's about. I know that you and I have talked about this at length, and with Kyle, because like part of Tough Mudder's brand is cheekiness, irreverence, weird shit. We know we got too far away, right? Just as a whole brand, it's like, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Let's make this thing tough again. And so instead of it just being, the Legos, it was, well, you've got to run the half mile out to the Legos. So the penalty is real, but why not just ditch the Legos altogether? Why not just send them out there with a cement block or nothing, just something long they have to do? So why the Legos, Chris? Speak now for Legos, please.
Other than my own affinity for them. No, I mean, it's interesting, right? It speaks to one of the big challenges with Worlds in general, which is Worlds mean so many things to so many different people. So what does warrant inclusion? It's a serious professional race for a lot of people with prize money on the line. It's, a great community gathering for others. It's a showcase of the Tough Mudder brand. There's a lot going on there. And so to really calibrate that to be the best version of itself is kind of difficult. I agree. I don't like things that are goofy for the sake of being goofy. I don't like things that don't contribute to the race itself, which is, an anchor of the entire event. So, that was what I was trying to get away from last year, where the penalty was just silly and easy. So you did that because why would you bother to go across dingleberries or something? So, I definitely see that side of it. However, I think their penalties have a few functions, right? The Lego one in particular, it seems silly, but especially if it had been colder than it was, when you're soaking your hands in ice water and putting something together and trying to use your brain when your brain is pretty bonked out from running all night, there's a mental aspect to that is also a part of the event. It's part of that going 24 hours and finding a way. And when you just can't focus anymore, that could trip you up just as much as the physicality can. And that's something that's not just physical conditioning. One of the things I love about Worlds is when we can introduce stuff. The cliff was a good example of it, I think, where it's no amount of training gets you past what that obstacle is for. I was always impressed, right? Ryan Atkins gets that. And I don't know how Ryan Atkins feels about heights, but he had to chuck himself off it, whether he could run 200 miles or not. He had to chuck himself off that just like the rest of us.
20 times.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, more than everyone else.
Right.
So, I think that's where some of those things sort of come in. In the past, we've done stuff like the bouncy balls or potato sacks were out for a portion of, this race. Those are physically challenging, even if it makes you look like an idiot, which is just like icing on the cake. So we tried to balance it, right? Make them a little bit more creative, make it more engaging. It's a special event. Innovation's a part of it. But I don't want stuff out there. I think in 21, we had Etch-a-Sketch on course. That was temporarily on the docket for this year. And then we pulled it off because it just felt, that feels to me like it's going a little bit too far into the silly for the sake of being silly. And it is fun. It is unique, but it doesn't add enough to the race experience, I think. So we pulled that back.
Right. So and you did have random hot sauce stuff in the race center, which some people love. I forgot who came up to me and got the first two and said, I'm going to get them all. And I'm like, you go for it. So I like that that's separate as well. Jen seemed to have fun with that. I think she wanted to make it even crazier, I think.
Always. Yeah. And it's a cool way to sort of keep those weird, tough different challenges involved in the race, but it's, sort of racer's choice. If you have no interest in that, you're just running your race, head down, amazing. But there's room to be quirky and weird and make people choke on hot sauce. And yeah.
You know what I saw? I love this time of year, all the memories on the Facebook once upon a time when I posted on Facebook. So there's a bunch of like, oh, that's the Vegas year. Oh, that's the year I got 50. Oh, that's the year that, like, because it's around this time of year. So I just saw someone had shared, and I forgot this. We actually had, I'll say you, TM, actually had live tracking. Like you could type your favorite athlete and you'd see their initials. Is that gone because it was just really expensive, but you found a way to do it one year and you had the money for it?
It's a good question. So back to what we were talking about earlier, for a chunk of those years, pretty much all the Vegas years, I was racing and intentionally kept away from the world's product. I was actually shut out of those meetings as to not have an unfair advantage. So I vaguely remember what you're talking about. I don't remember during the race because I was running. But yeah, it may well have been either a sponsored product that we were able to use then, or something we were testing out but didn't move forward with, or it just isn't practical to do everywhere. So I'm not sure. It's a cool opportunity. I vaguely remember.
I thought I screenshot.
There
I
was
was trying to find it, but basically it was like a little triangle and your initials, and it kind of showed where you were on the map. It was pretty cool.
Oh, I do remember this. That was a great deception. So, and not from it's just the way that technology worked. It would show you moving along the course. However, it wasn't doing that because you were GPS tracked. It was doing that because it was averaging your pace from previous splits and then approximating where you would be. And I only remember that because there was a lot of feedback afterwards. And I remember my pit crew asking, because they would see you approaching the point and they'd be waiting there and you weren't there and you weren't there, you weren't there. And it turned out because on that lap, there was some crazy hard obstacle or some crazy hard penalty. So you weren't tracking with your previous splits. And so you were throwing off. So that was approximation based on that tech, which works really well if you're running a marathon or if you're running whatever, where your pace is a little bit more predictable, but doesn't work super well for an obstacle course race.
Yeah, and I think what we have now is pretty good, right? There's 4 points where your racer could see you. Although, I just found it interesting that on the one board it was 4 points, and on the small board it was 5 points. Like you could always get the mutter horn, which is the real important one. Like, holy crap, here they come.
Yeah, and sometimes we set up splits, like the mutter horn split we added there specifically. So as race directors and finish line announcers would know when someone was almost there,
right?
And that was really handy. Mutter horn was so close to the finish that for most people, they'd catch them at the finish split.
So let's talk about venue. Let's separate rumor from fact. And I know there's certain things you probably can't talk about yet, but I think I kind of like the idea of at least a couple years in one location. Like 3 was cool, maybe 4 was too many, right? And I say that not just for Worlds, but like Tahoe was cool, right? Like, hey, we're going to Tahoe for the World Champs for Spartan, and then by like the 4th one, we're like, all right, let's mix it up. And by mix it up, I didn't mean in Abu Dhabi, but hey, it's what they did. So with this, beautiful Atlanta for 2 years, and then we've gone 1 year Ardmore, 1 year Granbury. Now we're going to Florida, and there's rumors of permanent venue. So what are we thinking here? What are we thinking? Do we want a permanent home? I hope we don't. I hope it moves every few years. What are we doing?
So, well, I think a few things. I think anytime you say permanent in this industry, you mean like foreseeable future. You don't mean permanent.
Right.
It's just too dynamic. At the same time, being somewhere semi-permanently, just call it 5 years, does have some real benefits. Especially if you're at a good venue, we know people like the ritualization of it. It's really helpful, right? When you can just approximate, I know how to get there. I know where I'm going to stay. I know those things. We do see customers tend to repeat more when you relocate.
Listen, I got a delicious Capriati sub in Vegas every year because it was my go-to.
The breakfast burritos at the Westin. I don't know if they were the best breakfast burritos in the world, but they have such a special place in my heart because that was just the ritual every year. So there's something to that, and I do think when we move venues, especially if we're moving a far geographic distance, you see a little drop off because people have to reassess their plans, and maybe that's when they decide like, I'll take a couple year break, whatever it is, or a 1 year break that turns into a couple of year break. So consistency in that regard, I think, is really important. It also gets our team comfortable with what they can do with that property, right? The cliff wasn't on the Lake Las Vegas course the first year. I think it was the second year we were there, if I'm remembering that correctly. So there's just you get in there and you mess around with it and you unlock other opportunities and you can play with it and you can have an homage to the previous year while also doing something distinct. So there's a lot of benefits in that regard. It also opens us up in some instances for semi-permanent obstacles, things that just help make sure that we're never building stuff on the day of a race again. So there's a lot of benefits in that regard. For next year in particular, we had been eyeing a particular venue that we thought was really good to go back to again and again and again and again. And at the last second, we found out we weren't going to be able to go there for next year. So we did have a backup, but it wasn't the one that we had really like been wrapping our head around long-term infrastructure at. And so I can't say, with certainty if next year's will be at multiple years. I would like to still. It's the spot we're aiming for is a good one, and we're quite close to announcing exactly what it is, unless we already have. So
you haven't announced, I can tell you that. I would have heard.
Okay, you frankly probably would hear before I did, but I know where it is. I just I don't know the exact day we're going to say thumbs up, but yeah, I think it'll be quite good. I would like to go for
Orlando, Tampa ish.
Yes,
that's what we can say,
which is great, right? Like I think one of the things we look at, and it's the boring logistic stuff, but a ton of people come from the UK to race Worlds, so East Coast is really good for a big chunk of our audience, and good international airports or tourist hubs are big. So Vegas actually worked pretty well for that because tons of international flights come into Vegas. Atmore, Alabama, less so. Pensacola says it's an international airport, but you can't actually get flights straight there. I think it took Giles like 2 days to get there. So being near good airports is huge, and then having access to hotels. It was one thing that was really nice this year. I think there was a cool, good downtown with places to go and eat and lots of hotels within 15 minutes of the venue. That's great on Friday when you want to sleep in.
I forgot about the Laughlin one year too, by the way. I forgot about that
Laughlin one. Yeah, well, you could see the casinos from the venue there.
That was kind of fascinating. Interesting, though, you say international. Atlanta happens to have an amazing international airport. Huge. It is that airport is also 3 hours or less flight for 75% of the country, which I didn't realize until I lived here so long. And you said like there's a drop off. Maybe we didn't give Atlanta enough of a chance, right? Maybe we should have done more years in Atlanta, because the weather here is actually usually pretty good in November. We just happen to got some bad luck, guys.
We usually do. I'm in
t-shirt and jeans. I'm in t-shirt and shorts most days out here.
I can't believe we lucked out this year. This was the first year I can ever recall where it got warmer from the week leading in to the day of the race. It's always the inverse of that. So maybe you're right.
And I had heard it was muddy. I packed my Tough Mudder rain boots. And I never had to take them out. There were like 2 little puddles on course I had to step over the whole course.
Yeah, I think a couple spots got pretty mucked up, but for the most part, there's a lot of high ground. We tried to go over as many hills as we could, so that obviously helps. The water runs off of those, and there is rock underneath, so relatively firm footing for much of it, which I think works better for Worlds.